When I travel around speaking, I like to give messages that are encouraging, and I often talk about things dealing with suffering and trials. And a lot of times I come back to that, or if I'm covering a subject that's even historical, I like to end with Christian living anyway. So if I'm ending with Christian living, I like to come back with dealing with trials and dealing with suffering. The reason is I'm an apologist, meaning I'm a supporter of the Bible, and I'm a supporter of the concept of God, just as you are. And the biggest challenge we have as Christians is how to help people deal with suffering. Years ago, I went and studied different things the atheists believe and why they hate religion. And why did I study that? Because I wanted to be better prepared to actually help young people, college-age students, because in college they try to do away with God and they try to do away with the Bible. They're really making great strides of doing away with the Bible, but they're having a tough time of doing away with God. But I wanted to know their arguments so I can deal with their arguments. I looked up one official writing was the 12 scriptures atheists hate. And I wanted to see those scriptures because I know what scriptures they use to try to throw away God and throw away the Bible. I want to be prepared to deal with it. There's a book out entitled God's Problem. And I don't like the name of the title, but I do believe the concept that there is a problem. How to explain to people why there is suffering. Because that is the big problem. Why would a righteous, loving God allow this suffering to go on? It's a problem. And I hope that you're well-versed in it, well-versed in explaining that when you're helping people going through trials, that you have some inkling about how to help people who are going through suffering. So I would just tell you right up front, a lot of my speaking is trying to help people going through trials in support of God and in support of the Bible. What I've chosen today is entitled God's Grace in the Thorns. And again, in the local area, I'll be happy to give a handout to each one who wants a copy of the handout. That way you can have the scriptures in front of you. But God's grace in the thorns. And I want to discuss that. Let's turn over to 1 Peter chapter 1. 1 Peter chapter 1. And as you're turning there, I'd like to ask some questions. 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 6 and 7. I'd like to ask some questions. Does the Bible really say that people should be happy in trials? Does it really say that? Isn't that approach encouraging people to avoid reality? Oh, just be happy in trials. Just be happy. Is that telling people to ignore and avoid reality? Isn't that approach encouraging people to become lost in denial? Oh, just deny it. Just deny what's going on. Just avoid what's going on. And again, that's what some people would say. That's what some psychologists would say. That's what some psychiatrists would say. There are Christian-based psychiatrists and there are non-Christian-based psychiatrists. And they would say, if you and the congregation you're talking to today and the congregation on the internet, if you're telling people that they should be happy in trials, you're doing them a disservice. A lot of people would say that. I don't say that. But we have to understand people do say that, and we have to be prepared for that. Isn't that approach really religious voodoo? That's what they would say. You're just practicing voodoo, man. Follow the science. And follow the science is very interesting because I believe in science, although let me tell you something true about science. Science is never settled. Science is not designed to be settled. Check out the definition of science. It's never designed to be settled. So whatever, like even on the science about the pandemic or the science about climate change, it's not settled. It's not designed to be settled. And by the way, science will lead you to evolution, and science for many people will lead them against God. So be very careful. As much as I like science, and I appreciate science, you have to realize I don't believe our religion is voodoo. I don't believe any religion is voodoo, but it will be sold that way. So is it possible to be happy in trials? Is it psychologically healthy to be happy in trials? I ask you to turn to 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 6 and 7. In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while, if need be, you have been grieved by various trials, that the genuineness of your faith, being much more precious than gold that perishes, though it be tested by fire, may be found to praise and honor and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ. So again, the trials are designed to be more precious than gold. We're to be tested by fire. Of course, you understand the atheist would say, you're using the Bible to prove your case. And I say, yes, I am. I'm making the Bible to make my case. And they would automatically discard that. But today, I want to help you. I want to spend more time helping you today with 3 different points about how to deal with what's going on around you. And I want to help you with this. The first one is sometimes God will send a friend. Sometimes God will send a friend. Look at 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 16 through 18. When you're going through a trial, sometimes God will send a friend. We're going to talk about how God will deal directly with us, but he sometimes will deal with us by sending a friend. And that's the really amazing thing about it is how people pray for help and God will send a friend. I was in Dallas-Fort Worth Airport years ago, and I came across a lady who couldn't speak English. She was Asian. Unfortunately, I didn't ask her. Was she from China, Japan, Korea, Vietnam? I did not know. She couldn't have answered anyway. But she was there, and she was lost. She was lost. And so I thought, well, I told her, I got her attention, looked at her ticket, and I told her to come with me, and I got her to a different terminal and got her on the plane. Something all of you would do. That's done millions of times by people. But she probably went home and said, an angel helped me today. And of course, I like telling my friends that. It's one of the few times I'll ever be called an angel. But how many times have you done the same thing? You've been there for someone. Now, I'm not saying that was any special religious thing, but the thing is sometimes God will send a friend to help. One of my favorite stories in the Bible is the guy named Onesiphorus, over in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 16 through 18. I love this man. I love this man's story. And let me tell you why you will too. Because all of us have been in a life where we've been disappointed by people. We've been disappointed in people. We've been let down. Sometimes friends will hurt you. Certainly strangers will hurt you. And we come to appreciate in this life the people who support us, as we also support them. I don't know what kind of marriage you're in, so I please hope your marriage is good. But I have a great relationship with my wife, and I can depend upon my wife. I trust her, and she's been very supportive of me, and I've been very supportive of her. I say that knowing that not everyone hearing this on the internet has that situation. I ask you to please ask God to help you with that, and appreciate all the good things that your mate does for you. Appreciate all the things good people do for you. But it's really nice. In this life, you have disappointments. You have trials. And you will appreciate the ones who are there for you. That's Onesiphorus. Verse 16, the Lord grant mercy to the household of Onesiphorus. Some people think he may have died. Maybe his household was, since he had died, please be kind to his household. Either whether he was alive or dead, the story is still good. Why did Paul like Onesiphorus? For he often refreshed me when he was ashamed of my chain. But when he arrived in Rome, he sought me out zealously and found me. The Lord grant to him that he may find mercy from the Lord in that day, because you know how many ways he ministered to me at Ephesus. So here was Paul in house arrest, being slandered. He must have done something wrong because he was in house arrest. He must have done something wrong. And so people were believing the hype. People were believing the reports. And of course, he did make mistakes. He did kill Christians. And he did throw Christians in jail. But he repented of that. And here was this guy, went all the way to Rome and sought him out. That's a friend. I want you to appreciate all the individuals who have been there for you. Let me also say this to you. You know how memories are formed, don't you? Memories are formed through adrenaline. That's why if you have good memories of something, you had adrenaline rushes that were good. That's why you have so many good feast memories. Because your adrenaline was rushing at the feast, your kids, adrenaline is rushing at the feast, they have great memories. Also, bad memories are formed from adrenaline rushes through abuse of authority, abuse of power by parents, uncles, aunts, teachers, employers, pastors. Anytime there's abuse of authority, that adrenaline rush leaves a bad memory. I want to point this out to you because there are some people you've had such good adrenaline rush with, you will never forget them. And that's what I feel about your pastor, Charles Gross. I probably have a stronger adrenaline positive rush toward him than he would have toward me. Let me explain. I've told you before, he was my first boss. When I came out of college as a student, and at that time, in that church I was in, one of the pastors had just left the church and had just taken people with them. Some pastors went with them, and it was a split in the church. And at the college I was at, one of the officials said, "Well, good riddance, we don't need them. We've got these ambassador college students we can send out to do their job." Well, when you're 21 years old, as I was, I'm sure my head was huge, because I was just told by the administration that I could do that job, and we don't need them. And of course, when we're all susceptible to pride and vanity. So I went out there, and Charles Gross was my first boss. It's like I said, I'm sure that I have better memories of him because he had been around a while, and he has good thoughts toward me, what he says, but I have great thoughts toward him. So I will always have Charles's back. I will always have his back. He said just 1 year working for him, but once you condense that situation, once you've been there for someone, once they've been there for you, even if you've been separated for a long period of time, you always have their back. See, I have great memories with John Reedy. John Reedy and I were in school together. So again, these individuals you have great memories for. And that's why some situations, they're friends. There are people who even don't attend the same church I attend anymore. But I have great memories for them. And actually would have their back in a crisis. They may not believe that, but I would. And probably they would for me. The point here is, just like with Paul, Onesiphorus was there for him. Sometimes God will send a friend. Appreciate the friend that God sends, and be happy that sometime you can be that friend and help other people. The second point is, sometimes God will send an angel. Let's look at Luke chapter 22, verse 43. Sometimes God will send an angel. This is interesting in churches, because you have people in different churches, you have people with different views about angels. You have people with different views about the supernatural. Probably like any subject, you have extremes. You have some people who are claiming everything is supernatural when it may not be so, to other people who will never, ever accept a supernatural event. So I don't know where you are in the spectrum. Hope you're right in the middle. But I hope you're not one who ignores a supernatural event or one who overplays a supernatural event. Sometimes people will say to me, like I'm going to read verse 43, when Jesus was praying his famous prayer, he's praying his famous prayer about, take this cup from me if possible, but your will be done. Verse 43, then an angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthening him. Now sometimes people will say, Dave, why are you mentioning that angel going to him? Do you realize people may be looking for that? Well, yeah, that's okay. But Dave, you're opening them up to negative influences. What if they get caught up with an evil angel? What if they get caught up with something negative? Dave, they're not mature enough to handle it. Well, that's what I'm saying is we should be more mature as in our personal relationship with God grows. If you've been in a controlling organization ever in your life, and some of you are listening, and you may still be in a controlling organization, you may hear things like, don't be looking for angels, don't be looking for the supernatural. And I'm saying is you've been called by God. God picked you. God's working with you. And yes, you have to test the spirits. I'm kind of a connoisseur of the book of Job, but I'm not going to take time to go through any of that today. But with the three friends, God really did not like what the three friends said. And if you listen to what the three friends said, sometimes it doesn't sound so bad. So why in the world would God said in chapter 42, verse 7, I don't like what the three friends said. That was on record that he did not like what the three friends said. But yet, and by the way, if you give presentations quoting the book of Job, I'm going to caution you, please be careful who you're quoting. Because if you're quoting from the three friends, you could be quoting things that God doesn't want said. Now, and by the way, now that I'm saying this to you, every time you hear the book of Job being quoted, look to see who's talking. I'm just telling you that because I look, first thing I hear Job quote, I say, who's saying it? Uh-oh, he's quoting one of the three friends. That guy just making a mistake. And you don't disrupt the service or anything. You just recognize what the problem. I think it's in Job 4, around verse 12. I think, I'm not going to turn there because it's really not part of my message and I got to stay on time. I think what happened with the three friends, the first friend, Eliphaz, had a dream. And they often had dreams. A lot of people heard from God in dreams. But he plainly says that a spirit came to him. And the spirit came to him and gave him kind of the message he was saying. So a lot of people miss that. But the point is this then. So Dave, you're saying that we shouldn't mind an angel coming from God to comfort us and to strengthen us. I'm quoting the verse saying, yes, I think that's a good thing. But I am saying, you're mature, you're growing, be careful. So avoid either extreme. Please don't avoid the spirit world, but please don't be a sucker to the spirit world. Take personal responsibility in relationship with God. Sometimes God will send an angel, and that should not scare you, that should encourage you. Let's go to the third point. Sometimes God will use thorns, and hence that's the title of the sermon, God's Grace in the Thorns. Let's turn to Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. This is a beautiful story. This is a precursor to the life of Jesus Christ. The story here of Joseph is kind of a precursor to the life of Jesus Christ. The message of Joseph is a similar message to the New Testament message of Christ. But notice verse 20. This is interesting. Remember his brothers threw him in a pit, tried to kill him, then tried to sell him. And then he got over there, became famous, became powerful. And then when they had the famine, he was able to help the family, all that. And he recognized them, they didn't recognize him. And finally he revealed himself to them and they were scared. And he played little games with them when he wanted to get his dad over. He used Benjamin as bait kind of thing. So all that's part of the story we don't take time for today. So they were concerned like, uh-oh, that's Joseph. That's the guy we threw in the pit. That's the guy we sold him into slavery, and now he's a bigwig in Egypt. Yikes, we're in trouble now. But as long as Dad's alive, we're okay. But Dad died. So verse 20, that's the backdrop that says, as for you, verse 19, don't be afraid, for I am in place of God. I'm not going against what God wants for you. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. So sometimes people will actually try to hurt you. And I'm going to cover that more in Big Sandy today, but you have to recognize when people are trying to hurt you. But when you recognize people are trying to hurt you, remember that God's in the picture too. And God could be using it for good. God meant it for good in order to bring about to this day to save many people. So when something happens to you, whatever the trial is, it's possible that God is meaning it for good. You can say, Dave, are you guaranteeing that God is meaning it for good? No, I can't make that guarantee. It's possible that God is meaning it for good. But my advice to you is, look at it as either, number one, God is meaning it for good, or even if God is just watching, find the good. Find the good in the situation, because it's either exactly what God's doing, or it's certainly what God would want you to do. Find the good in the situation. Let's look at Daniel chapter 3. I love the attitude of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I love this attitude. and I hope this is the kind of confidence you have. Instead of being afraid. Now, seriously, friends, recognize that what's bad's going on. Recognize the bad. When your friend does something wrong toward you, recognize it as wrong, but react correctly. When your spouse makes a mistake and does something wrong, recognize it as wrong, but react correctly. When politicians of both parties do things wrong, recognize it as wrong, but react correctly. By the way, I'll just say this. This is a mild comment. I'm all for boycotts. I don't mind boycotts. Just don't loot my house. Don't burn my house. Don't shoot at me, okay? Boycotts are fine. In fact, I boycott a lot. But you know what the difference is? Y'all don't know about it because I don't make my boycott a public thing. My family knows about it. You know what my family's response is? Boys, I'm boycotting such and such for such and such a reason. And my boys will say, that'll show them, Dad. Well, I'm not trying to show them. I'm not trying to spread it. I'm not even telling you what my boycotts are. I do my boycotts for myself. Like, I'll give you an example. A couple of the Hollywood people were using money to pay the bail of some of the rioters, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. Well, I don't like that. So I'm boycotting their shows and their movies. They don't know it. They don't care. It doesn't affect them. I'm doing it for me because, like, you really? You're doing that? Oh, man, why are you doing that? But that's just me. That's just for my personal health. The point is, recognize the evil, recognize the wrong, but dwell on the positive. Stay on the positive. See, I love these Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I love it here in Daniel 3. Here, Nebuchadnezzar makes this big rule about, I'm going to set up this golden image, I'm going to play music, and people are going to bow down to this golden image. Oh, verse 12, there were certain Jews there, these Chaldeans came up to Nebuchadnezzar and said, by the way, they were narking on them. By the way, there's some of these Jewish guys here who aren't bowing down. Well, they were trying to push Nebuchadnezzar's button, and guess what? It pushed his button. Verse 13, he became furious. He said, really? They're not bowing down to me? Bring them in here. So he called them in. In verse 14, he said, is it true that you don't serve my gods? Is it true you don't worship the golden image which I set up? Now, if you're ready, when we play this music, I want you to bow down. And who's going to deliver you from my hands? Verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you of this matter. Here's the point. This is the case. Our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand. But if he chooses not to deliver us now, which that's why I don't believe name it, claim it. I don't believe name it, claim it. You go before God and say, God, you made this promise. You have to do it. I think that makes us over God. I think it makes God look like a dog. I don't think this, but this is what I think they look like. Here, God, you got to heal me. You got to do what I say. I don't believe that at all. I believe God is sovereign. God's in charge, and God will let me talk to him. He'll let me negotiate with him like Abraham. He'll let me beg. He wants me to talk to him regularly. He doesn't mind me negotiating with him. He's in charge. And these guys knew he was in charge. Because they said, we know he can take care of it. Hey, but if he chooses not to, let it be known, O king, that we will not serve your gods. We will not worship the golden image which you've set up. The reason why I think this is important is, when you're going through a trial, you can't use the name it, claim it is, God, you have to get me through this. You got to do this job situation the way I say. You've got to do this relationship the way I say. You got to help me with this rioting the way that I say. You got to help me with the national and international chaos the way I say. Folks, do not take that approach with God. Do not allow the name it, claim it scriptures to cause you to be rude to God. Be people of faith, because these three guys had faith. They said, we're trusting God. We're looking to God. God can solve this. And we're asking he solve it in a good way. And God did solve it in a good way. He said, but if God chooses to do it differently, we want to let you to know we are not bowing down to your image. And so I think, again, sometimes you have a trial and you think, well, God has to do it my way or there is no God. God has to do it my way or he's a weak God. God has to do it my way or he's a mean God. See, that's what the people will try to play on you, and that's what you'll play on yourself. Sometimes God uses the thorns to get the job done. Sometimes he sends a friend. Sometimes he'll send an angel. And sometimes he'll say, I'm going to let you sit in a while. Because think about the biblical message. What is the biblical message in the Old Testament and in the New? Calamity is coming. Then there'll be restoration. That's the message about the prophets. That's the message of the book of the sermon. The Olivet prophecy. Calamity is coming. There will be restoration. And the thing is, time is so different to God. God may say, I'm going to let calamity come for a little while. How long, God? Oh, just a short time, just 70 years. I'm 67. If I were living at that time, I'd be almost to the end of the calamity. My whole life would have been calamity. My whole life would have been calamity. And he would have said, don't worry, I've got this under control. I just told you only a little time. Well, Dad, because he's my spiritual dad, Dad, a little time to you is my whole life, Dad. He said, I've got this. I've got this. My message is calamity, restoration. And so that happens sometimes in our personal life. You'll have a tough time, but God will deliver. This final conclusion, final scripture, 2 Corinthians 12, verses 7 through 10. 2 Corinthians 12, verses 7 through 10. The beautiful scripture of Paul hearing the answer, no. God sometimes says no. He said no to Moses when Moses wanted to see the promised land because Moses, well, first of all, Moses kind of lost his temper at one time. And for whatever other reasons, he said, you can stand up on the hill and look all the different directions, but you're not going to step foot into the land. God said no to David when David wanted his son to be saved, but that was probably because of David's sin. So God can say no. And that's not necessarily a lack of faith. It can be a consequence, but not a lack of faith. But in Paul's case, it wasn't because he lost his temper. Yes, he did actually kill Christians, but that's not even stated the reason why God said no. Because in verse 7, Paul said, lest I be exalted above measure, a thorn in the flesh, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I be exalted above measure. Concerning this thing I pleaded with the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. And he said to me, verse 9, my grace is sufficient for you. My strength is made perfect in your weakness. We all want quick answers. We all want yeses. We all want miracles. And he does that for us. Our miracles today don't seem to be quite as dramatic as in the Bible times, but there are miracles out there if you pay attention. If you're praying for people who are sick, if you're watching people go through tragedies, there are miracles. I wish there were more. I wish they were more dramatic. Maybe they will be. But there are miracles out there. But sometimes God says, no, I'm not taking away the thorn. No, I'm not taking away the circumstances. Because I want you to realize my grace is sufficient. My strength is sufficient in your weakness. And so sometimes what God will do miracles. You know, we want, when someone has cancer, we want them to be healed the second after they've been anointed. We all want that. But I tell you, I think God's name is glorified more in the people he doesn't heal immediately. But he helps through every stage of their cancer. Through every stage of the cancer, they inspire doctors, nurses, family members, strangers. And as they live through their pain, as they live through the trial, God is still with them and God is still helping them, not in the way any of us desire, but God's strength is shown in the weakness of the situation, in the fragile nature of the situation. God has shown. I'd like to conclude by reading a portion of an article that my brother wrote for our website. Every week on our website we have 2 different articles. I write one and I bring a guest in to write one. And my brother wrote this. It was written back in May 9th, 2015. Our stepfather had died on April 30th, 2015. The funeral was on May 4th. I did my mother's funeral, but for my stepfather's funeral, I was kind of like the host and moderator, and my brother was the main speaker. It was just really great the way he did that. And much of what he said in the memorial for my stepfather was in that article. The subhead of this in his article was, God's grace is always sufficient. God's grace is always sufficient. My brother wrote, one would think a successful life is one without hardship, but that is not true. In a sense, life is like the stem of a rose. On one end is the beautiful, fragrant flower, but that flower is supported by a stem that has thorns. During the good times, it's easy to praise God and accept His grace. These are the times when our prayers are answered the way we want, the bank account is full, and we are experiencing total satisfaction. But how do we accept God's grace when it comes to us as a thorn? God gave the Apostle Paul a thorn in the flesh to keep him from exalting himself. Jesus spoke directly to Paul and stated, my grace is sufficient to you. Jesus specifically said the thorn was God's grace. My father, our stepfather, accepted the flowers and thorns of God's grace. Around the age of 10, our stepfather and his brother were placed into foster care. This occurred because of a divorce and remarriage. During the formative years, my dad never saw his mother again, and he was visited by his father only once a month. But what is most remarkable, no one ever heard my father express a word of bitterness or resentment toward his father or stepmother. It is the thorns like this that cause us to be perfected in Christ. If our lives are to be successful, we must remember God's grace, even though it may be given to us as flowers or thorns. God's grace is always sufficient. So what I wanted to spend a little time to you today to remind you about that, I want to remind you that God will sometimes send a friend, and sometimes you can be that friend. Sometimes God will send an angel. Don't be afraid of the supernatural. Test the spirits and recognize the good spirits and recognize the beauty of the spirits and appreciate when God sends an angel to you. And number 3, God will sometimes use thorns. God will sometimes bless you in the midst of your trial. So you're going to have trials. You're going to have hardship. Appreciate the times of peace. Appreciate the times of beauty. Appreciate the times of calm and peace. But look for the peace and look for the beauty in those trials. Because remember, sometimes God will bless you. God's grace will bless you in the thorns.